"Dad, get out of that car right now." Clara's voice burst through the phone so loud and desperate that my whole body froze. "He's taking you to a nursing home in another state. I saw the papers. He plans to leave you there and keep all the inheritance money." "Run, Dad, run." The line cut before I could answer. My hands shook as I stared at the phone. The car kept rolling smoothly down the highway, and Michael, my eldest son, sat at the wheel, calm and steady, as if nothing was wrong. His face looked peaceful, too peaceful, like he wasn't quietly taking me away with a fake smile hiding a dark plan. Just 2 days earlier, he had shown up at my door, something he almost never did. He said he wanted to reconnect. "Let's take a trip, Dad. Just the two of us, like when I was little." He hugged me, spoke gently, even praised the coffee I made. He told me he had booked a lovely cabin near a lake, with silence and a fireplace, so we could talk like old times. And I, foolish and longing for affection, believed every word. It was everything I had been craving: attention, care, the feeling of being remembered. But now Clara's scream echoed in my head, while Michael's cold silence beside me made the truth clear. He didn't want to talk. He wanted me gone. "My name is Sam. I'm 79 years old, a widower, father of two, and my hands carry the scars of decades of labor. For over 40 years I worked as an agricultural technician, first on a farm in Iowa, then near Minneapolis. I was never about luxury, only honesty and hard work. And now, strapped in this car with the seatbelt pressing on my chest, I realize something bitter. Sometimes the real danger doesn't come from strangers. It comes from your own blood. Before I go on, I want to thank the Father's Tales Hub channel for letting me share this story. Stay with me until the very end, because this story carries a powerful lesson you shouldn't miss. If the video touches your heart, give it a like, and in the comments tell me the name of your city so I know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story. It all began 2 days after the anniversary of my wife Eleanor's passing. I was sitting in silence, staring at her photos in the living room, when a knock came at the door. It was Michael. He never visited unannounced, but this time he came smiling, hugged me, and placed an apple pie on the table, saying it was from his favorite bakery. He looked at me with a strange, forced warmth, and halfway through the coffee, he suddenly said, "Dad, I want to spend some time with you. I want us to reconnect. We've grown distant, and I miss you." I reserved a cabin in the Adirondacks, quiet, away from everything, just us, no phones, nothing else. Just the two of us, no cell phones, nothing, only us. Those words surprised me. My oldest son, who barely replied to my messages, suddenly wanted to spend an entire weekend alone with me. For the first time in a long while, I felt important, I felt noticed, and I said yes. On Friday morning, he came to pick me up. We got into the car, and he told me the trip was long, but promised it would be worth it. We drove along back roads, passing through quiet little towns and paths I had never taken before. During the ride, his voice was flat. The conversation was light, almost forced, without real feeling. You know that heavy silence that hides something underneath? That was exactly what I felt. I kept telling myself it was just in my head, until suddenly my phone, which had no service before, vibrated. It was Clara. Her scream through the line changed everything. After that call, I was fully alert. I tried not to show my fear. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and asked Michael gently, "Son, what's the name of the cabin again?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he threw back another question and then quickly changed the subject. My chest tightened, my heart pounded faster, sweat collected in my hands. The paved road ended, turning into a dirt track with no signs, no houses, no life around. That's when I knew I had to escape. A chance came when we stopped. Michael said he needed to fill up at a small, worn-down gas station in the middle of nowhere. As soon as he parked and walked inside the store, I told him I needed the bathroom. Grabbing my backpack, I slipped out of the car, moved quietly, and rushed inside. I locked the bathroom door and sat there, still in my clothes, not knowing what to do. Minutes dragged like hours. After about 10 minutes, I suddenly heard the engine roar. The car pulled away. He had left me behind without a call, without a message, as if my disappearance had been the plan all along. I forced myself to move. Stepping out of the bathroom, I asked the cashier for the store phone and dialed Clara. She picked up right away, breathing heavily. "Dad, thank God, where are you?" I gave her the name of the gas station. She told me firmly, "Stay there, I'm sending Richard, my friend. He's a retired police officer. He'll reach you in 40 minutes. Don't leave the store, don't go anywhere." So I sat by the window, staring out at the empty road, trying to understand how Michael, my own son, could fall so low. How could a child lie to the father who raised him, plot against him, plan to lock him away, only for money? That's all it was. Clara had discovered the truth. He had forged papers, used a power of attorney I once signed for the bank, and filed for guardianship in another state. The plan was cruel but clear. Get me out of town, force me into a nursing home he had already paid for, and then take control of my bank account, the same account where I had kept the inheritance left to me by a distant uncle. Michael knew about the money long before I did. And instead of being honest, instead of sharing the truth with me, he chose to scheme. He smiled in my face while secretly plotting my downfall. Richard arrived right on time. A tall man with a steady voice and serious eyes, he treated me with dignity. Without hesitation, he drove me straight to Clara's house. That is where I remain even now, silent, watching, waiting. Michael never called, never checked if I was alive, never sent a single message, and that silence told me everything. He knows his plan failed, and maybe he believes I will stay quiet, but he has no idea who I am. I am not foolish, I am not weak, I am a father, but also a man who still stands. Wrinkles on my face don't mean my mind is gone. A slower step does not mean I am useless. Whoever thinks they can erase their father out of greed will learn the truth. An inheritance cannot be stolen. It is something earned, and this son of mine deserves nothing. When Richard left me at Clara's home, I sank into the armchair in her living room. I felt like someone still trapped inside a nightmare, unable to wake up. It was as if I had just walked away from a place where time twisted, where words were lies, and where even hugs were weapons. My head spun, my chest ached. Clara stood in front of me, tears glistening in her eyes, her jaw tight with rage. She stretched out her hand and placed a stack of papers on the table. "Dad, look closely. You need to see everything." I wasn't ready, but I forced myself to read. There it was, written in black and white, the name of a clinic in rural Oregon, a contract with dates, payments already made, and a digital signature. A forged letter with my name, saying I gave permission to be committed forever, signed under the title of legal guardian. His name, my own son's name. He had already filed for partial guardianship, claiming I lacked clarity of mind. He even had it notarized. Attached was a fake medical report from a clinic I had never stepped into. It claimed I suffered confusion, that I struggled with judgment, that I could no longer manage basic routines. My hands shook as I read. My own son calling me insane. And for what? Just to strip me of access to that inheritance. Money I had saved so carefully, money that came from my great-uncle Leo, who passed away in upstate New York. The truth is, I never expected that fortune. Uncle Leo never had children, and his wife had died long before him. When he passed, I was the only close relative left. As a boy, I used to visit him, and every Christmas I sent him letters. He remembered that. That is why the money came to me. The inheritance wasn't huge by the world's standards, but to me it was a treasure. After taxes and endless paperwork, a decent amount was left in my hands. I never told anyone about it, not even my children. I saved it quietly. I used a little to repair the roof, bought better medicine instead of the cheap ones, and kept the rest untouched. My plan was clear. That money would one day help my grandchildren, for their studies, their weddings, or when life would demand support. But Michael discovered it, and that's when his plan against me was born. Clara explained later how suspicions began. Michael's boyfriend, Tom, had started to notice his unusual behavior. He thought it odd that Michael, who rarely visited me, suddenly wanted to take me away. His tone when speaking about me was cold, almost empty. Tom grew uneasy, so he began paying closer attention. He overheard conversations, listened in when calls were on speakerphone, and without Michael knowing, he secretly copied some recordings. One of them shattered me. It was Michael's voice, calm and cruel. "I'm already handling this. He won't even notice. By the time he realizes, he'll already be committed. An old man like that sitting on $90,000 in his account, and he does nothing with it. I won't let it rot." When Clara played that audio, she stopped it midway. My hand covered my mouth. I felt sick, like my stomach had turned inside out. Hearing my own son speak of me as if I were nothing more than a burden, a barrier that needed to be removed, it crushed me. What broke my heart wasn't the money. It was the coldness, the contempt in his tone. How he called me that old man. I, who cradled him the day he was born, who sold my only car to pay his tuition, who wore the same worn-out clothes so he could have a future. This wasn't a stranger plotting against me. It was my child. Sitting there, I could only picture his tiny hands once wrapped around mine, the soft way he used to call me Daddy. Where had that boy gone? What twisted piece of life replaced him with nothing but greed? Clara, with tears in her eyes, apologized for not telling me sooner. She admitted she had sensed something off in her brother, but never imagined it could reach this level. She begged me to stay at her place for a while. I agreed, not out of fear, but because I needed space to think. At that moment, I stopped being only a wounded father. I became a betrayed man who still had his voice, his mind, and the right to fight back. The very next morning, I asked Clara to drive me to the bank. There I met with Henry, my trusted manager, who had known me for years. I laid everything out before him, the documents, the forged papers, the truth of what Michael had tried to do. I requested that every outside transaction be blocked immediately. Together we reset all my details, and I created new security with dual authentication. For the first time in days, I felt like I had taken one step back in control of my own life. I left my old bank card on the counter and asked Henry for complete secrecy. From there, Clara drove me straight to the notary. I cancelled every single signature, every power of attorney I had ever given Michael, all of them. Then I updated my will. His name was removed without hesitation. My hand was steady, my heart cold, because a son who plots to erase his father for money does not deserve to be remembered. On the drive back to Clara's house, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, but she understood it was not awkward silence. It was grief, real grief. I had not only lost trust in my son, I had lost my son himself. As I stared out the window, watching houses pass by, I kept thinking how easily things could have ended differently, if not for Clara's call, if not for her desperate scream, if not for her bravery in exposing her own brother. Later that afternoon, my phone lit up with a message from Michael. Just one line. "Did you arrive safely?" I didn't reply, and I never will, because what I have to say cannot be hidden in a text. If he wants to hear my words, he must stand in front of me and look me in the eyes. And I know what he will try. He'll say it was a misunderstanding. He'll claim it was for my protection, that I am too old to know what I'm doing. He'll try to paint me as confused, tired, sick, but it's too late. I may be 79, but I have never been stupid, and I have never been weak. Now he will see exactly who he tried to deceive. The days that followed were the quietest of my life. Not a peaceful quiet, but the silence of someone whose heart has cracked in two. I stayed in a simple, cozy room at Clara's house, a window facing the backyard where iron chairs sat beneath a tree that Eleanor would have adored. It was there, breathing in the smell of damp earth and hearing the faint rumble of cars far away, that the truth began to sink in. Realization never comes all at once. It arrives in fragments, cutting deeper with each thought. Every memory with Michael now tasted bitter, spoiled. The phone didn't ring, no message came, no attempt from him to ask where I was, how I was, or if I was alive. And strangely, that silence hurt more than if he had shouted curses at me, because it proved he already knew the truth, that I had uncovered everything, and instead of facing me, he chose silence as his shield, that cold, careful silence of someone waiting for dust to settle. But in my heart I knew one thing: with me the dust would never settle, because this was not only about money, it was about betrayal of blood. It was not only betrayal, it was betrayal of blood. On the second day, Clara took me to meet her lawyer, a firm and capable woman named Margaret. She welcomed me with respect, speaking in a way that restored some of the dignity I thought I had lost. I laid everything out for her: the forged papers, the recordings Tom had captured, the file Clara had carefully gathered. Margaret listened with calm patience. She asked sharp questions, noted everything in her small notebook, then looked directly into my eyes and said, "Mr. Sam, what your son has done is extremely serious. This is fraud, an attempt at illegal guardianship, embezzlement, and elder abuse. He will not only be investigated, he could face criminal charges." I swallowed hard, feeling a lump in my throat. Never in my life did I think one of my children would sit under the weight of a criminal accusation. But then again, I never imagined I would one day run from my own son's car to avoid being locked away like a stray dog. At that moment, I realized anything was possible. We signed the necessary papers. I filed a formal complaint. Margaret prepared an urgent notice, blocking Michael from making any move in my name. She also contacted the clinic, warning them that if they tried to admit me under false pretenses, it would be treated as kidnapping and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. When I walked out of her office, I felt a little more like myself again, not because justice could erase his betrayal, but because I had finally stood up. I was no longer the quiet father who suffered in silence, fading slowly while waiting for an apology that would never come. I was now the father who resisted, who refused to let silence and shame defeat him. That night, I sat on the porch with Clara. She brought me a hot cup of coffee and stayed beside me without saying a word. This silence was different. It was comforting, the kind of silence where nothing needs to be explained. I stared up at the stars and whispered, if Eleanor were here, she would have uncovered all of this long before me. Clara gave me a faint smile and replied she would have slapped him before calling a lawyer. We both laughed, soft, broken laughter, but laughter nonetheless. And in that moment, I realized that even in the middle of betrayal, pain, and lies, I still had something to be grateful for. Clara was my anchor. She could have stayed quiet, pretended not to see, but instead she screamed into the phone and pulled me out of danger. She saved me. The next morning, Tom came to see me. He arrived holding a small bag, his eyes lowered in guilt. "Mr. Sam," he said quietly, "I had to come. I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner. I kept telling myself Michael would change. I thought it was only angry talk, but when I saw those papers, I froze." He looked at me with guilt in his eyes and whispered, "I was afraid. But when he traveled with you, I finally realized he was serious, that he truly meant to disappear with you." I held Tom's hand firmly and said, "You saved me, son. Now live your life without this weight. The guilt is not yours to carry. He is the one who must answer for what he's done." Tom broke down, tears streaming down his face as he hugged me tightly before leaving. I don't know if I'll ever see him again, but deep inside, it doesn't matter anymore. That same afternoon, an email arrived on my phone. It was from Michael. Cold, short, sharp, his words cut like ice. "Dad, I only wanted what was best for you. You're old, fragile, and you don't see things clearly anymore. If it were to hurt you, I'd never have done it. But this was for your own good." Reading it made my stomach turn. Those words were poison, the kind that hides cowardice under the mask of care, that dresses betrayal as protection, that covers greed with fake concern. I didn't reply. I deleted it. Some things don't deserve an answer. Some things you answer with silence and with actions. The days went by slowly. I started walking again. going to the supermarket with Clara, sitting on a park bench, watching children laugh and run. Life began to return, little by little. But inside me, a part stayed silent, the part that once loved Michael with pure innocence. That part died. It died the day he plotted to bury me alive in a clinic, all for the sake of a bank account. If he thought I would disappear, he was wrong. No father is perfect, but no father deserves betrayal that deep. And now he will not only face the law, he will live with the shame of having tried to destroy the one who believed in him most. And that shame, I know, will cut deeper than any punishment. Going back to my house was like stepping into a battlefield after the war had ended. The curtains still carried Eleanor's scent. The armchair where I read every afternoon still bore the shape of my body. The calendar on the wall still showed the month when everything fell apart. The old key scraped in the lock. The iron gate groaned as though complaining about my long absence. But I walked in with my chest high. That floor belonged to me. That roof was built with the sweat of my hands, with the calluses of a lifetime. And now, after everything, it was time to reclaim what was left of my dignity. Time to return, not as the same man, but with new eyes. Before opening the door, I looked around carefully. The street was silent. No sign of Michael's car, no unusual movement. Slowly, I stepped inside. I switched on the lights, filled my lungs with air, and stood still. Nothing seemed out of place, yet everything had changed. Because now I was no longer the same man. A man who had seen evil rise from within his own family. A man who had to escape from his own son so he wouldn't be buried alive in a place meant for the forgotten. And a man who returned not to erase the past, but to demand justice. On the third day after filing the complaint, lawyer Margaret called me. Her voice was steady as she explained that the judge had urgently suspended any attempt at guardianship. More than that, the entire process Michael had filed was annulled, and now a criminal investigation was officially open. The clinic even confirmed that Michael had already paid for 6 months in advance, signing documents as if he were my legal guardian. That alone was documentary fraud, enough to expose his scheme. The detective in charge advised me to stay watchful but remain calm. For the first time in weeks, I finally slept, truly slept, with the comfort of knowing that justice, though slow, never fails when you refuse to lower your head. The next morning I sat in the backyard, staring at the cherry tree I had planted on the day Michael was born. It still bore fruit, crooked, aged, but alive, just like me. I wondered if the little boy I once held in my arms would dare to look at me today. I doubted it. Cowards don't face people directly. Cowards work in the shadows. They file false papers, forge signatures, make secret plans, and then vanish. That's what he did, and that's why he hadn't come near me since. That same day, I decided to go through my old papers. I pulled out the blue folder where I had kept bills, tax receipts, certificates. I sorted through everything carefully: inheritance statements, deposit slips, transaction records. I wanted it all organized, not for me but for the future. And among those papers, I found something I had almost forgotten, an old letter, handwritten by my Uncle Leo not long before his death. His words pierced me. Use this money to protect your freedom. Never let yourself depend completely on anyone. Freedom itself is wealth. Whoever has even a little of it is already rich. That line struck me to my core because it explained everything. I had nearly lost my freedom, not to sickness, not to age, but to greed, and the one who almost stole it from me was my own flesh and blood. That night I called Clara. I asked her to come have dinner with me on Saturday. I told her I wanted to start a new tradition, dinners at home every weekend. No rush, no phones, no excuses, just us. She agreed without hesitation and said she would bring the grandchildren too. You need the sound of children running through the house, she told me. And she was right. After so much silence, it was time to let life's noise return. But before that, I had one last matter to resolve. A matter tied to a single word: deed. I gathered all my documents, called Margaret, and asked her to update every detail of my property registration. I told her to add strict clauses, rules that would make it impossible for anyone to transfer or touch my property without me standing there in person with my face confirmed. I will never again let someone play with my name, not the bank, not even my own son. I also made sure that when my time comes, the house will pass directly to my grandchildren, with Clara holding life rights. Michael's name was erased from everything. He wouldn't inherit a single nail from this home. Margaret looked me in the eyes and said softly, "Mr. Sam, I've never seen someone with so much clarity and strength." I thanked her, but I told her this wasn't courage, it was survival. Because when life pushes you into a corner, you either learn to stay silent or you learn to speak out. And I chose to write my future with my own hands. Late that afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened the gate and found Tom standing there alone, holding an envelope. His voice shook as he said, "He's still trying to convince me to help him, Mr. Sam, but I can't anymore. I feel like I've been part of it. These are screenshots, recordings, and notes of everything I saw. I want you to have it all. I don't want to carry this weight anymore." I took the envelope, placed my hand on his shoulder and told him, "You saved an old man's life. Never forget that." His eyes filled with tears as he walked away. I went back inside, closed the door, sat in my rocking chair, and held that envelope tightly as if it were a mirror, one that showed me the truth, who truly cared for me and who only cared for what I had. That night, I opened a notebook and wrote everything down. Not for revenge, not to accuse, but so that one day, when my grandchildren are grown, they will know. They will know that their grandfather was betrayed, but he didn't fall, that he was deceived, but he fought back, that they tried to lock him away far from home, but he returned. And most of all, they will know that this house, the place where they grew up, remains safe. No greedy hands will ever reach it. It was built with honesty, and those who live by lies have no place here. That Saturday, my kitchen felt like a scene from an old film I thought I'd never watch again. Clara arrived with her 2 children, their laughter echoing through the rooms as they ran and jumped around. Little Sophie, just 8 years old, rushed straight into my lap with a drawing in her hands. "It's you, Grandpa, with the sun shining behind you," she said proudly. I took the paper with care, pinned it to the refrigerator, and in that moment, the house that had been silent for so long finally breathed again. I spread the old flowered tablecloth across the table, the one Eleanor always loved, and served roast chicken with stuffing and rice, seasoned with turmeric, just the way she taught me. It was family food, comfort food, the kind that feeds not just the body but the soul, because those who love you stay at the table, and those who lie eventually vanish. While the children laughed and filled their plates, Clara helped me open a bottle of wine. I looked around the room and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a moment that belonged to me, a slice of peace after a storm that nearly destroyed everything. Michael's silence, which once ate at me like rust, now carried another meaning. It was no longer an empty silence. It was the silence of relief, the silence of someone who had removed poison from their life. His absence was no wound anymore. It was freedom. This was the same son who once told me I was his hero, that he wanted to grow up and be like me. Now he was nothing more than a name stuck bitterly in my throat. And if he ever dared to ring this doorbell again, I don't think I would speak. My eyes would say enough. The eyes of a man who had seen too much, felt too much, and still survived. After the meal, Clara pulled me aside. She whispered that Michael was back at his office, pretending as if nothing had happened. He was even telling people his father had suffered a breakdown, that everything was just a misunderstanding. But the lie wasn't landing. Some clients were already questioning his behavior. One man, an old acquaintance from my agricultural days, recognized me in a photo and told others, "That's Michael's father, a good man who once helped me sort out my land problems decades ago." Life is strange that way. Truth has a way of showing itself, and masks always fall no matter how tightly they're glued. That night I made a decision. I would not stay hidden. I would step out, walk the streets, let people see me upright and alive. So I put on my old hat, my vest with pockets, and went to the downtown market. I walked through the aisles, stood patiently in line, bought some plantains, and carried the bags home with steady hands. Neighbors asked where I had been. Some just gave me knowing smiles. But in all their faces, I saw respect, the kind that can't be bought with money or forced with power. The respect earned only by standing tall, even when betrayed by your own blood, and still keeping your dignity. On Monday, I went to see Dr. Henry, my bank manager and longtime friend. He welcomed me with warm coffee and a firm handshake. "Mr. Sam," he said, "everything is secure now. Only you, with your fingerprints and password, can touch these accounts." I thanked him and gave him one more instruction. If anything ever happened to me, only Clara would be allowed to open the sealed letter I had left with my instructions. And then I told him firmly, if Michael ever shows his face here, treat him like a stranger. Because the man he tried to erase on that highway, that father he betrayed, died there. What stands here now is someone else. Who lives here now is not the same man as before. I came back home with the documents in my pocket and a heart that was heavy but steady. I stepped inside, took off my shoes, turned on the radio, and walked to water the plants. There it was, the white rose Eleanor had planted years ago, blooming again. I stood still, staring at that flower, thinking about how some things grow quietly, even in the middle of cement, dust, and disappointment. It stood alive, pure and strong, just like me. Later that afternoon, I sat with my notebook once more. But this time, I didn't write a record of events. I wrote a letter, not for Michael, but for myself. It was a farewell, a goodbye to the father who once believed that a son's love was something certain, something guaranteed by blood. But it's not. A child's love is not a rule, not a debt, not a contract. It is a choice. And my son made his choice. The wrong one. Now it's my turn to choose. I folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it in the same drawer where I keep my ID, my voter card, and the last photo of Eleanor smiling. That's part of my story too. The pain, the loss, the truth. Hiding it doesn't heal, but writing it down teaches. When night came, I made tea, opened the window, and looked at the quiet street outside. And I knew with certainty whoever plants neglect will always harvest distance. And that distance is all my son will have from me now. Slowly the news began to spread, the way things always do in a small town. First, Mrs. Collins at the pharmacy whispered to a neighbor that Sam was back. Then the baker told a customer he had seen me at the farmer's market. Soon after, the story reached more distant family members, the ones who only show up at funerals or baptisms. Within 3 days, my inbox was full of messages from cousins and nephews, people who had never come to share a cup of coffee with me, but suddenly wanted to know how I was after that confusion. Confusion, that was the soft word they used for what had nearly happened to me, for the betrayal, the theft, the attempt to erase me behind locked doors with a stranger serving tea at 5. But the biggest surprise wasn't the sudden concern of relatives. It was a phone call from my sister-in-law, Eleanor's sister. A strong woman, sharp and fearless, who always said what she thought. She hadn't known anything until she saw Tom, Michael's ex, sitting in a church pew, crying like a broken man. He confessed to her, saying he had saved me from something terrible. She went looking for answers, spoke with Beatrice, and then called me directly. "Sam," she said, "I'm not asking for explanations. I'm calling to tell you I stand with you. And shame alone is not enough for what Michael has done." Her words touched me deeply, because I knew her voice carried weight. And with time, more and more people would begin to look at Michael differently. And being looked at like that hurts, because lies grow sick when the truth shines on them. That same week, there was a birthday dinner for Michael's niece. Of course, I didn't go to that birthday dinner. I wasn't even invited. But Tom was there. And in the middle of the celebration, he suddenly stood up and spoke with a clear, firm voice. What Michael tried to do to his father was inhuman. And if anyone here thinks this is just an exaggeration, then take the road with him and see for yourself." The hall went completely silent. The birthday girl's mother, red with shame, tried to change the subject quickly, but it was too late. The words were spoken and the truth was now out in the open. The whole family knew, not because I had told them, but because truth always finds a way to rise, even when people try to bury it. The very next day, Beatrice showed me a screenshot from the family group chat. Someone had written, "Is it really true?" And another replied, "If Sam disappeared and then returned like this, there must be a reason." I wouldn't doubt anything coming from Michael. I read those lines with a heavy chest. Deep inside, a small part of me still hoped someone would defend him. Someone would say, "No, Michael would never do such a thing." But no one said it. Not a single voice stood up for him. That silence said more than words ever could. That night, as the fan spun slowly in the corner of the room, I stared at the ceiling and finally understood the greatest punishment for Michael would not come from me or from the courts. His real punishment would come from the eyes of others, from the way people would look at him now, from the memory of his betrayal that would forever stain his name. Because true justice is not only in stamps and signatures. True justice is when you lose what no amount of money can ever buy: respect, and Michael had lost it completely. On Friday, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered carefully. On the other side was Tom's mother, a polite woman with a tired voice. "Mr. Sam," she said softly, "I just want to thank you for welcoming my son when he was lost. He feels ashamed for what he went through, for what he witnessed, but now he also feels peace because he finally did the right thing." I breathed deeply and told her, "He saved me, and now he must also save himself." After the call, I kept thinking of how many people Michael's scheme had dragged into the mud. He had dug the hole alone, but he had pulled others down with him. Later, I went to Beatrice's house to drop off some vegetables from my garden. When I got there, the boys were in the garage playing. As soon as they saw me, they came running and hugged me tight. Then Sophie looked up with her big eyes and said, "Grandpa, at school, the teacher asked us to write about the hero of our life. I wrote about you." Those words shattered me, because in the middle of all that pain, there was still light. A child looked at me and saw strength, not weakness, respect, not pity, love, not interest. I walked back home with my bags empty, but my heart full. I stepped inside, closed the door gently, turned the radio to a soft hum, and sat down in my rocking chair. I opened my notebook, the one where I had been recording everything since I returned. On that page, I wrote only one sentence: "When family witnesses your contempt, even silence becomes a verdict." I closed it gently, turned off the lamp, and slept like someone who finally knows there is no need to explain himself anymore. The visit came without warning, on a grey afternoon. The gate knocked twice. I thought it was the mailman, or maybe Mrs. Parker from next door, who often came to ask for lemons. But when I opened the door, my breath caught. It was him, Michael. His head was lowered, his hair tied back carelessly, and he wore that same wrinkled blazer he used when he had nowhere else to hide his weariness. Slowly he lifted his eyes and said, "Dad, can I come in?" For a second, it felt like I was staring into a broken mirror, a son looking at his father, searching for shelter. But there was no shelter left here, no open door, no excuse ready to cover the wound. There was only the truth between us, and truth does not move aside. "This house is no longer a place for lies," I answered with a voice stripped of warmth. He opened his mouth, trying to speak, but I cut him off. "Everything you needed to tell me, you already said when you placed me in that car, thinking you could trick me, when you signed papers behind my back, when you erased me from your story just to take what was mine." He stood in silence, like a man hearing a sentence without a lawyer beside him. Then slowly, he lowered his head, turned around and walked away. No fight, no explanation, not even a question about how I was. And strangely, that hurt worse than any scream could have. I closed the gate quietly, went back inside, sat in the armchair, and let out a deep breath. His visit brought no peace, no sign of regret. It only confirmed what I had feared, that the little boy I once knew was gone forever. The man standing in front of me was a stranger, someone who chose greed over his father's eyes, control over care, and I had nothing left to give him. Even love has limits, and he had crossed mine long ago. The next day, I told Beatrice what had happened. She listened in silence, then said firmly, "Dad, if he comes back, call the police. This isn't conversation anymore, it's about respect." I nodded, because when someone tries to erase your very existence, what comes afterward is not reconciliation, it's survival. And I was surviving, day after day, with coffee brewed strong, papers in order, and eyes wide open, because a man who goes through what I went through never sleeps the same again. He sleeps with one eye on the pillow and the other wide open on memory. Later that week, I went back to the notary. I signed an addition to my will, something small but meaningful. I asked that in my honor, a simple park bench be built with Eleanor's name carved into it, so that even after she is gone, she would still receive the sun. The clerk who wrote it down smiled warmly and said, "That's beautiful, Mr. Sam." I looked at him and replied, "It's poetic justice. She earned her place of peace, and I too deserve mine." On the way home, I ran into Mr. Harris, my old neighbor, who stopped me at the gate. "I heard what happened," he said. "I admire your courage. Most men would have stayed quiet." I looked him in the eye and answered, "Those who stay too quiet rot from the inside out." He lowered his head and nodded, because there are wounds that speak louder through silence than any scream could. That night was cold, but inside me burned a steady fire. Not a fire that destroys, but one that lights the way. A fire that came from the simple truth. I was alive, I was standing, and I had not been broken. I didn't win because I ruined my son. I won because he couldn't ruin me. And that victory no one can take. The next Sunday, Beatrice arrived with the grandchildren. They carried cake, soda, and even a board game. The house filled with laughter, shouts, and small hands tugging at my arm. Little Eleanor smiled wide and said, "Grandpa, we're going to come every Sunday, okay?" I kissed her forehead and replied, "If you bring that smile, you'll always have a seat here. This house belongs to those who love me. The rest turned to dust on the road." And I meant every word, because if one day someone asks why my eldest son never came back, I'll simply answer, the one who tried to erase his father erased himself from his own story. But life doesn't leave scars without testing them. The following week, a stamped envelope arrived in the cold hands of a court officer. A summons. Michael was contesting everything, claiming the revocation of powers, the frozen accounts, and the rewritten will had all been done while I was in a state of confusion, manipulated by others, especially by Beatrice. I almost laughed. Inside, I already knew. This wasn't surprise, it was expected. Just another desperate attempt to erase the fruit of his own actions. What he didn't realize was that I had prepared for this long before. Every word in that document only dug deeper the moral grave he had built for himself. I picked up the phone, called Margaret, and spoke without hesitation. "The attack has begun." She told me to stay calm, that this was a predictable move, and that she had already written the counter-petition. Then she looked at me and said, "Mr. Sam, now is the time to use what you've kept safe, the evidence, the recordings, the papers. Do you still want to move forward with everything?" I answered without hesitation, "Yes, because a son who tries to erase his father with a pen must watch his own name fall apart in ink." In the days that followed, I was visited by a social worker, questioned by a court psychologist, filled out forms, and even took medical exams. Each person left my house saying the same thing: "You are clearer in thought than many young people today." I laughed, because I always had my mind steady. What I lacked was the wisdom to know who to trust. And trust, I was learning, is like glass. Once broken, even if you glue it, it never looks whole again. In the middle of all this, I received a letter with no name on the envelope, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from Tom. He wrote that he had moved to another city, trying to start fresh, far from Michael's shadow. He confessed that Michael had tried to win him back with kind words and empty promises, but underneath he was still the same man. Tom admitted he regretted not warning me earlier, but said his burden was lighter now because he had saved me. "You are not just a father who resisted," he wrote. "You are a wall that refused to fall." I folded that letter and placed it inside the notebook where I record my story, because some words don't fade, they stay carved in the soul like a scar. At the first hearing, I walked in with Beatrice by my side. We held our heads high. Michael arrived in a polished suit, lawyer at his side, arrogance in his step. He never met my eyes. He stared at his papers, pretending focus, but every time the judge spoke, I saw his pride deflate little by little. Fernando stood up with confidence, presented the documents, the screenshots, the audios, and the official reports. When she finished, she closed her folder and said firmly, "My client is not seeking revenge, he is seeking respect, the one thing his own son denied him." The judge nodded quietly. No one spoke. The silence in that room was heavier than any sentence. A silence that condemned him without saying his name. On the way home, we said almost nothing. Beatrice drove steadily, while I looked out the window, watching the world pass slowly, as if time itself wanted me to breathe in the weight of what had just happened. The houses, the trees, the streetlights passed by the window, and I felt I had arrived at a point in life where time no longer excuses, but it teaches. I couldn't undo what my son had done, but I could choose who I would be in the middle of it, and I chose to stand tall, without hatred, but also without forgetting. Without revenge, but with justice. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line: "The one who tears the past to grab the present ends up losing the future." And that's exactly what he did. He ripped apart everything we had lived together, just to try to silence me, but he failed. I was still here, alive, with my memories, my clarity, and my dignity unbroken. The next week, the prosecutor's office called me. The investigation for attempted fraud against an elderly person had officially begun. Now it wasn't father against son anymore, it was citizen against criminal, and not even the family name he carried would protect him from that. I sat on my porch that evening, hot tea in hand, and thought of Eleanor. If she were alive, I know she would say, "Sam, that man stopped being your son the day he tried to erase you. He's just a name on a piece of paper now." And she would be right. Because when a son tries to erase his father, he ends up erasing himself from his own story. And now, word by word, sentence by sentence, I was the one writing this story until the very end. The case moved quickly. Fernando called me almost every day with updates, new orders from the judge, statements from the prosecutors, witnesses giving testimony, even a warrant to check Michael's accounts. The net was tightening around him, and in my heart there was no revenge, only justice. For the first time in years, it felt like someone finally looked at me and said, "You're not losing your mind. You're right." And for a father who was treated as if he were nothing but a burden, that was worth more than gold, because dignity once lost is almost impossible to stitch back. But when you recover it, you breathe as if the air is cleaner, lighter. The following week, I was summoned to testify in person. I walked into the courthouse in simple clothes, a blue shirt, clean shoes, and a steady step, slow but firm. They led me into a quiet room where I sat in a cushioned chair and spoke. I told it all, without exaggeration, without rage, only the naked truth. The invitation for that trip, the false smile, the endless road, Beatrice's scream through the phone, my escape, the papers, the recordings, and his cruel attempt to erase not only my will but my very existence as a man and a citizen. The clerk wrote down every word. The prosecutor leaned forward, listening closely. When I finished, she took off her glasses, breathed deeply, and said softly, "Mr. Sam, you are much stronger than he ever believed you to be." I walked out of the courthouse with a lighter chest. Not because justice was already served, it wasn't, that would take time, but because I had spoken my truth, and speaking is a kind of freedom. I came home with my soul whole again. As I passed through the gate, I saw Sophie in the backyard with her paintbrush. She raised it high and shouted, "Grandpa, I'm painting a castle for you to live in." I smiled. For a moment, I thought of telling her that I already lived in a castle, because that little yard with her laughter and innocence was worth more than any palace in the world. But I stayed quiet, because some truths don't need words, they are felt in the heart. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote about forgetting. How time teaches us to erase the names of those who wound us, not out of hate, but as protection. Because remembering burns and forgetting becomes a way of survival. I wrote, "A name may stay on a birth certificate, but it doesn't always stay in memory." And with that, Michael lost his place as my son. On paper, yes, the law still called him that, but in my heart, he no longer lived there. The next week, a small note appeared in the local newspaper. City lawyer under investigation for fraud and attempt to force interdiction against own father. No names were printed, but everyone who knew the story understood. I got phone calls from old colleagues, even former clients of his. They said, "I never thought this could come from him." And I answered only, "We never think it will, but sometimes blood doesn't guarantee character." On Saturday, Beatrice called me. She told me Michael had tried to drain money from an old account they once shared through the firm, but the bank had blocked it. She said now his defense was to accuse everyone of being part of a conspiracy, and then she laughed. "Dad, he's drowning in his own lies." I didn't laugh with her, I just stayed silent, because some people don't need an enemy, they destroy themselves. And he was writing his own end with his own ink. On Sunday, Beatrice and the grandchildren came to my house. They carried a simple cake with a candle that had no number. "Today is the day you came back home," she said. "We're going to celebrate this every year." My eyes filled with tears, and I realized that in the middle of all the loss, I had not lost everything. Yes, I lost a son, but I gained something stronger, the chance to start a new chapter with those who truly stayed. That is something no false paper and no stolen signature can take away. That night, on the last line of my notebook, I wrote, "A son is not the one who pretends, but the one who truly cares." Real inheritance is what we leave inside hearts, not in a will, and memory only keeps those who deserve to stay. Then I closed the notebook, placed it in the nightstand, turned off the light, and fell asleep. I slept that night like I hadn't in years, without fear, without worry of waking up somewhere strange. Because now I was the one who decided where I stayed. The morning when the final judgment arrived was quiet, with a shy sun and a calm wind. A court officer came to my door, holding a sealed brown envelope, and called out my full name. I opened the gate slowly, calm inside, because deep down I already knew what it would say. I held the envelope, opened it carefully, and read line by line. The judge had closed the case. Every attempt Michael made was denied. His accusations against me and against Clara were dismissed as lies, empty and malicious. The fraud investigation against him was accepted, and in the judge's own words it was written clearly. The defendant showed full clarity, independence and reason. At the end, stamped in black ink, was his name, not as son, but as defendant. I breathed deep and let a small smile appear. It wasn't a smile of joy, it was a smile of justice finally recognized. I sat on the porch with the paper in my hands and called Beatrice. She came quickly, her children still in the back seat, and after reading it in silence, she hugged me tight. "Truth won, Dad," she whispered. I shook my head gently and answered, "No, it wasn't just truth that won, it was resistance. Because truth alone sometimes stays quiet, but resistance keeps shouting until someone listens." The next few days passed in silence. Michael vanished. I heard whispers that he took leave from the office, that long-time clients refused to renew their contracts with him. But no one told me more, and I never asked, because to me he was nothing more than a faint echo now, a badly told story left behind. A man who tried to bury me, but ended up burying his own name from the memory of the living. I didn't die. I returned stronger. To mark this, I chose something symbolic. I took Eleanor's old wooden bench, the one she loved to sit on while clearing dry leaves, and donated it to the city square. I asked only that a small plaque be fixed in memory of those who remain. They agreed. Now when I pass by, I see strangers resting on that bench. They don't know the story, but they sit on a piece of my life, and that is enough for me. At home, Sundays are alive again. Sophie makes sweets now, and proudly calls me her best friend. Little Ollie asks eagerly when I'll tell more farm stories. Beatrice brought a hammock and tied it between the trees in the backyard, and I keep filling pages of my notebook, one by one, because now I am the author of what remains of my story. At the end of this road, I find no revenge, only strength, no anger, only memory. And above all, I hold the certainty that being a father is not about staying silent for peace. It's about protecting your own soul so they don't bury you alive. And that is what I did. When I stepped into that car, I thought it was out of love. But when I stepped out, I realized it was an ambush, and still I survived. Today, if someone asks about my eldest son, I don't answer with hate. I simply say, he left, and with him went everything that no longer belonged here: lies, greed, and contempt. This house now shelters only what is true, and here there is no space left for fake love that steals peace. And if you listened this far, I thank you. I also want to thank the Father Tales Hub channel for giving me the chance to tell my story. To support this channel, please subscribe and share this video, because every day brings a new story, and maybe, just maybe, one of them might feel close to yours.